My daughter said, "Don't come to my baby shower." At first, I thought I heard her wrong. Maybe the line cut out. Maybe she meant something else. But she didn't. Her voice was steady, calm, like she had practiced those words before saying them out loud. I had just finished knitting a tiny yellow blanket that morning. The yarn still sat warm in my lap when she called. I was smiling, humming to myself, thinking about what pie I'd bake for the celebration. I was going to surprise her. But that call, Lord have mercy, it turned my joy cold in a heartbeat. "Mom," she said again, softer this time, but still sharp around the edges. "I think it's best if you don't come." I remember the room going quiet. So quiet I could hear the old fridge buzzing. My hand tightened around my phone. "Don't come?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Baby, why would you say that?" She didn't answer right away. I could hear movement in the background, a man's voice faintly calling her name. Her husband. I waited. Finally, she said, "It's just, we want the day to be peaceful. You and I have different energies right now. I don't want any stress." Different energies. I still remember those words clear as daylight. I wanted to ask her what kind of energy she thought I had. The energy of love, of prayers, of a mother who worked 2 jobs and went without so she could have new shoes for the prom. But my throat was tight, and all that came out was a whisper. I didn't know I was the problem. "Mom, please don't make this harder," she said, her tone colder now. "I just want to enjoy this time without drama. You understand, right?" I didn't. Not one bit. But I said, "All right, baby, if that's what you want." Then she said, "Thank you," quick and polite, like she was checking something off her list. The line went silent after that. I sat there staring at the wall. The blanket slid from my lap onto the floor. I didn't even pick it up. I just stared, numb, until the clock ticked so long it started sounding like footsteps walking away. You ever feel a silence so heavy it presses down on your chest? That kind that makes the air taste bitter? That's the silence that filled my house that day. I reached for my coffee, but it was already cold. I sipped it anyway, just to have something to do. Outside, the sun was still shining, birds still singing, like nothing had changed. But everything had. And you know what's funny? I still set that date on my calendar. I told myself maybe she'd change her mind. Maybe she'd call back and say, "Mama, come after all." But baby, she didn't. Not that day, not the next. And what came after was worse than I ever imagined. 3 days passed before I heard her name again. It came from someone else's mouth, not hers. I was sitting on the porch, sipping my tea, when my neighbor, Miss Pearl, called out, "Gloria, you see that fancy flyer they posted online? Your daughter's baby shower looks like it's going to be something." My stomach dropped. "Flyer?" I asked, pretending not to care. She nodded, waving her phone. "Whole thing's on Facebook. Big hall rented, fancy catering, some theme with balloons and gold lettering." I forced a smile. "Oh, that's nice." When she went back inside, I just sat there, quiet. My tea went cold again. Then, Lord forgive me, I picked up my phone. Curiosity and heartbreak make a dangerous pair. I searched her page, scrolled slow, and there it was. Photos of the decorations, a list of invitees, even a little caption that said, "Can't wait to celebrate surrounded by love." Surrounded by love, but not by me. I tapped the screen and looked through the pictures again. Her smile was bright, but something about it felt rehearsed. I could see her husband in the corner of one photo, pointing at a table layout, acting like he was running the show. For a moment, I just stared. Then I whispered to myself, maybe she's right. Maybe she don't want no trouble. But the truth is, I'd never brought trouble into her life, only sacrifice. I fought back to the nights when she was little, the way she'd curl up beside me in bed when thunder scared her. I'd hold her close, tell her stories until she fell asleep. I didn't have much to give her back then. No fancy things, no vacations, but I gave her love that could have built an empire. Now I was sitting here, years later, treated like a stranger. That evening, I decided to call her one last time. I needed to hear her voice. Needed to know if there was still a chance to fix things. She picked up after the third ring. "Hey, Mom," she said, her tone polite but tired, like she was already halfway out of the conversation. "Hey, baby," I said softly. "I saw the flyer. The decorations look beautiful." She paused, maybe surprised I'd seen it. "Oh, yeah, it's coming together. I wanted to ask if I could at least drop off the gift. I made something for the baby." There was silence, then a sigh. "Mom, I just think it's better if we keep some space right now. You can send it later." My fingers tightened around the phone. "I won't stay long, baby. Just want to leave it at the door." Then I heard him, her husband, in the background. His voice wasn't loud, but it had that cold authority I never liked. "Tell her no. We talked about this." She hesitated. "Mom, I gotta go," she said, her voice shaking a little. "Please don't come by." The line clicked. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark phone screen. The woman looking back at me had tears sitting heavy on her lashes. You ever feel like the world you built with your own hands just cracked right down the middle? That's what it felt like right then. But the next morning, I made up my mind. I was going to her building anyway. Not to fight, not to beg, just to leave my love on her doorstep. And baby, that decision, that quiet act, changed everything. I took the early bus, the one that still smells like yesterday's rain. I wore my soft blue cardigan and carried a brown paper bag with the yellow blanket, a small onesie with little clouds, and a card with some folded cash. The ride felt long. Streetlights blinked off, one by one, while the sun tried to wake up. I counted the stops like prayers. Her building looked new against the old block. Fresh paint, shiny rails, the kind of place where people pretend everything is fine. My knees ached on the steps, but I kept going. I set the bag by her door, smoothed the top like it was a baby's hair, and knocked once. Gentle, no fuss. I turned to leave because I promised myself I would not make a scene. "Listen to me, baby. Sometimes love looks like walking away before they can hurt you again." The elevator bell chimed down the hall. I pressed the button and kept my eyes on the little silver doors. Then the apartment door opened. He stood there in gym shorts, holding a protein shake like it was part of him. He looked me up and down, slow and uninterested. "We asked for space," he said. "Not hello, not good morning, just that." I kept my hands clasped so he would not see them tremble. "I am leaving it for the baby," I said. "Then I will go." He nudged the bag with his foot like it was something on a sidewalk. "Take your money," he said. "We are not a charity." My throat burned. "It is a gift," I whispered. "For my grandchild." He leaned on the doorframe. "Then send it after the shower. We already have everything. We do not need interference." That word landed hard. Interference. Behind him, I saw boxes of pastel decorations stacked neatly, a banner rolled in a tube, plastic plates in a sleeve. He was building a kingdom out of paper and tape. My daughter walked up from the hallway, one hand on her belly like she was guarding it from the truth. She did not look at me first. She looked at him. Then she lifted her eyes to mine. "Mom," she said, soft but stiff, "please go. I cannot handle stress right now." I nodded. I bent to pick up the bag. My knees popped loud in the quiet hall. The card shifted, and the folded bills peeked out like they wanted air. He watched the money, then flicked his eyes back to my face with a little smirk he tried to hide. "You understand what I am saying?" That kind of small cruelty tells you everything you need to know about a person. I pressed the elevator button again. The light took forever to glow. My hands would not stop shaking, so I folded them over the bag and stared at the floor. When the doors finally opened, one of her church friends stepped out, smelling like roses and hairspray. "Miss Gloria," she said, surprised. "You here for the shower?" Her smile was bright and innocent. I could not risk another cut. I stepped inside the elevator and said, "No, sweetheart, I was just leaving." The doors closed on her puzzled face. I breathed out slow while the numbers counted down. "You still with me?" Because when I reached the lobby, the worst part had not happened yet. When those elevator doors opened, I felt like I'd stepped into another world. Down in the lobby, balloons were everywhere, Peach, cream, gold. Laughter echoed from the party room at the end of the hall. I could hear music, too, soft and cheerful, the kind of songs people play when they want everything to look perfect. I stood there holding that brown paper bag, frozen. People were walking in with wrapped gifts, flowers, smiling, like they were part of a picture. Nobody looked at me twice. I was invisible, baby. Just another old woman standing in the wrong place. For a second, I thought about going in, just slipping through the door quietly, hugging my daughter, telling her I loved her. But then I heard her laugh. It was her real laugh, the one I hadn't heard in months. And that's when I realized she was fine, fine without me. I turned and walked out into the street. The air was bright and loud with car horns and chatter, but I couldn't hear much. Everything felt muffled, like I was underwater. I kept walking until I reached the bus stop, sat down on the cold metal bench, bag on my lap. You ever sit somewhere and feel like the world just keeps moving while your own heart stands still? That was me right then, watching buses pass, watching strangers carry on, wondering how love could go so wrong between a mother and her child. A bus came finally, and I climbed on slow. My knees protested with every step, but pain didn't matter much anymore. I sat by the window, the bag still pressed against me like it might vanish if I let go. When the bus pulled away, I saw one last glimpse of the building in the reflection, people smiling, balloons bobbing in the wind, everything shining like a movie. And there I was, riding away quietly, holding the gift I wasn't allowed to give. At home, I placed the bag on the kitchen table and just stared at it. The yellow blanket looked so bright against the brown paper, like it didn't belong in this sad little house. I touched the soft yarn with my fingers and whispered, "You'll still get to your baby one day. I'll make sure of it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face when she said those words, "Don't come to my baby shower." I wondered if she'd regret it someday, maybe when her own child grew up and turned away from her. But listen, baby, life don't move by wondering. It moves by lessons. And that night, sitting alone in that quiet kitchen, I learned one hard truth. Sometimes love means standing outside the celebration and letting them have their joy without you. Still, I prayed. I whispered, "Lord, if there's any kindness left in her heart, please let it find its way home." And you know what? It did, but not before the storm hit her door. 2 weeks passed after that day, and I tried my best to carry on. I cleaned the house, watered my plants, went to church, but nothing felt right. My mind kept wandering back to her. Every cup I washed, every plate I dried, she was there in my thoughts, smiling like she used to when she was little. I'd pick up that phone sometimes, scroll through our old text messages, and stop on one from 2 years ago. It said, "Love you, Mama. Don't forget to eat." I used to get messages like that every other day. Now I was lucky if I saw her name flash across the screen once a month. One night, after dinner, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. Outside, the wind was rough, carrying the smell of rain and wet pavement. I whispered to myself, "She'll come around. She's my child. She got my blood in her." But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. Around midnight, I picked up my phone and opened her social media again. I shouldn't have, but I did. You know how pain can make you curious, even when you know it'll hurt? Her page was full of baby shower photos now. Her smiling beside her husband, her friends surrounding her, everyone dressed in pastel pinks and creams. But what broke me wasn't the pictures. It was the caption underneath one of them. She'd written, "So grateful for everyone who showed up to celebrate this new chapter with me, surrounded by love and positivity." That word again, love. The same love that had no room for me. I put the phone down, and my hand was trembling so bad I almost dropped it. I pressed my palms against my eyes and took a deep breath. "Lord," I said, "I raised her better than this. Where did I go wrong?" The rain started falling harder outside, tapping against the window like someone trying to get in. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and just sat there, letting the sound fill the room. The next morning, I tried to distract myself. I cooked a big breakfast, eggs, biscuits, bacon, but it tasted like nothing. I even made an extra plate out of habit, set it down across from me. When I realized what I'd done, I just stared at that empty chair until my eyes blurred. That afternoon, Miss Pearl came by. She's been my neighbor for years, always watching over me like a sister would. She looked at my face and knew right away something was wrong. "You heard from her yet?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, not since the shower." She sighed. "Child, sometimes you gotta let the world teach your children what you couldn't." I nodded, though my heart didn't want to hear it. Still, those words sat with me long after she left. And wouldn't you know it, just 1 week later, the world started teaching. It started with a phone call I never expected. It was late afternoon when the phone rang. I almost didn't pick it up because I didn't recognize the number, but something in me said, "Answer it." When I did, a woman's voice came through, quiet and a little shaky. "Miss Gloria, this is Tasha. I'm your daughter's sister-in-law." My heart jumped. I straightened up in my chair, clutching the phone like it might disappear. "Yes, baby," I said quickly. "Is everything all right?" She hesitated before answering. "Not really. Your daughter's at the hospital." Her blood pressure shot up. They said it was from stress. She's stable now, but they're keeping her overnight. I felt my whole body go cold. "Which hospital?" I asked, already reaching for my purse. "She told us not to call you," Tasha said softly, "but I just thought you should know. She's at Mercy General." I didn't even wait to hang up proper. I grabbed my sweater, keys, and a small Bible off the table. My knees were stiff, but I didn't care. I caught the first cab I could find, told the driver, "Please, just go." The sky was gray, heavy with rain. Drops hit the windshield like tiny drums the whole ride there. When we pulled up to the hospital, I ran in as fast as my legs would let me. "My daughter's here," I told the nurse at the desk, out of breath. "She's pregnant. Her name's—" I gave her the name like it was gold in my mouth. The nurse glanced at her computer. "She's in room 213, she said, "but visiting hours are—" I didn't wait for the rest. I was already walking down that hallway, heart pounding in my ears. When I reached her door, I stopped. My hand hovered over the handle. I could hear her voice inside, talking to someone, then silence. I pushed it open slow. She looked up. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I came to check on you," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I meant it to. "Tasha called. She said you weren't well." She frowned. "I told her not to call you. I don't want stress right now." That word again, stress. It cut just as deep this time. I stepped closer anyway. "I'm not here to fight, baby. I just wanted to see you. That's all." She looked tired, pale. Her hair was messy from the pillow, and her eyes were red from crying. "I'm fine," she muttered, but her hand was trembling against the blanket. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small yellow blanket. "I brought this," I said softly. "I made it for the baby." She turned her face away, staring at the window. "I can't think about that right now." I nodded. My throat tightened, but I smiled through it. "That's all right, baby. You rest." I placed the blanket on the chair beside her bed and whispered, "You're still my child, no matter what." Then I left, before the tears could show. When I reached the hallway, my knees gave out a little, so I leaned against the wall, breathing slow. A nurse walked by and gave me a tissue without a word. I took it and whispered, "Thank you." That night, when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about how frail she'd looked. I sat by my window until sunrise, praying for her. And baby, I didn't know it then, but that visit was the start of everything turning. A few days later, I got another call, but this time it wasn't from Tasha. It was my daughter herself. Her voice was weak, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Mom," she said, pausing for a long breath. "They're letting me go home today." I gripped the phone tight. "That's good news, baby. You rest now, you hear?" She hesitated again, then said, I wanted to say thank you for coming." For a second, I couldn't even speak. My throat just closed up. I finally whispered, You don't have to thank me, baby. That's what mothers do. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the wall, tears rolling slow. That tiny thank you cracked something open inside me. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a door. Just a small one, but enough to let the light in. Over the next week, I stayed quiet. Didn't call, didn't text. Just prayed. Sometimes love needs silence to breathe. Then one evening, as I was folding laundry, I heard a knock at the door. Not loud, just a small, hesitant tap. When I opened it, there she was, standing on my porch with her belly round, her eyes swollen like she hadn't slept in days. "Hey, Mama," she whispered. I froze for a second, afraid to move too quick and scare her off. Then I said, "Come in, baby." She stepped inside, slow, looking around like she was seeing the house for the first time again. The same family pictures still hung on the wall, the same floral curtains she always said were too old-fashioned. She touched the edge of the table, the same one she'd done homework on years ago, and whispered, "Smells like home." I smiled faintly. "It never stopped being home, baby. You just stopped coming." She looked down, ashamed. "He's gone," she said finally. "They arrested him. Something about fraud, about the charity money." Her voice cracked. "I didn't know, Mama. I swear I didn't." I walked over and held her shoulders. "I know, baby. You couldn't have known." Her tears came hard then, shaking her whole body. I wrapped my arms around her and let her cry against my chest, like she used to when she was little. "It's all right," I whispered. "You're safe now." We stood there for a long time, the house quiet except for her sobs and the old clock ticking on the wall. When she finally pulled away, she said, "Can I stay here for a while?" I nodded. "You don't even have to ask." That night, I made her bed up with fresh sheets, lit the small lamp beside it, and left the door open, just like I used to when she was a girl. When I peeked in before going to sleep, she was curled on her side, hand resting on her belly, breathing deep. And for the first time in a long while, peace touched this house again. But deep inside, I knew karma had only just started its work. The days that followed felt slower, like time itself was holding its breath. My daughter barely left her room at first. She'd sit by the window for hours, just staring out, her hands resting on that baby bump like it was her last bit of strength. I didn't push her to talk. Sometimes silence does more healing than words ever could. Every morning, I'd knock softly and say, "I made breakfast, baby." Most days she didn't eat much, but she'd take a few bites to make me happy. I'd smile and pretend not to notice the tears she wiped away when she thought I wasn't looking. One afternoon, while I was folding clothes, she came into the kitchen. Her eyes were red but calm. "Mama," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, baby. Anything." She hesitated. "Why didn't you give up on me? After everything I said, after how I treated you, why didn't you stop loving me?" I put the towel down and looked at her. "Because I remember the little girl you used to be, the one who'd sneak into my bed during thunderstorms and say, 'Don't let the lightning get me, Mama.' That girl's still in there somewhere. I couldn't give up on her." She covered her mouth and started crying again, soft this time, like the kind of tears that wash away pride. I walked over, held her face in my hands, and whispered, "You don't have to be perfect to be forgiven. You just have to come home." That night, we sat on the porch together. The air smelled like rain again. She talked about everything. How her husband had been lying to her for months. How the money wasn't real. How he'd used her name for his schemes. "They froze my account," she said. "I don't even know how I'm going to buy baby clothes." I listened without judgment. When she finished, I said, "You don't worry about that right now. We'll figure it out." She looked at me, surprised. "After everything, you'd still help me?" I smiled. "That's what mamas do. We don't stop loving. We just learn to love quieter." Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat by the window, the same one where I'd once prayed through tears. Only this time, I wasn't begging for her to call me. I was thanking God she was home, even if it came through pain. You still with me, baby? Because this is where the story starts to bend towards something bigger than pain. The next morning, She woke me before sunrise. Mama! I think my water broke. I jumped up so fast my knees almost gave out. We rushed to the hospital, hearts racing, fear and excitement tangled together. Hours later, when that baby cried for the first time, I knew right then everything had come full circle. And when the nurse placed that child in her arms, she looked at me and said, Mama, will you hold him first? I'll never forget the weight of that baby in my arms, small, warm, and breathing steady like he'd been here before. His skin was soft as peach fuzz, and his little fingers curled tight around mine. I stared at him through tears that wouldn't stop coming. Hey there, Isaiah, I whispered, because that's the name she'd chosen. Welcome, baby boy. My daughter was lying in the bed watching me, her eyes swollen from crying, but this time they were tears of something else. Peace, maybe. Mama, she said, her voice trembling, I was wrong about everything. I shook my head. Hush now. The past done happened. We can't carry it into his world. She smiled weakly. I don't deserve you. I looked back at her and said, You're my child. That's all the deserving you need. The nurse came in, checking on the baby, adjusting wires, all that quiet hospital bustle, but I barely noticed. I was too caught up in the way his tiny chest moved, up and down, like forgiveness itself was learning to breathe. Later that night, when she was asleep, I sat by her bed, holding him again. The hallway lights outside the room glowed soft and yellow, and the whole place felt hushed. I started humming a tune from back when she was a baby, the same lullaby that had carried her through fevers and bad dreams. And it hit me then. This was grace, not the kind you read about, but the kind you live through when you've lost everything and still find love waiting at the end. When morning came, the doctor said both mama and baby were healthy. I thanked God right there in that room. My daughter woke, smiled at me, and said, I want him to know you, Mama. I want him to grow up with you around. That right there was all the healing I needed. A few days later, when we brought them home, the house felt different, lighter. The air didn't carry sorrow anymore. My daughter moved slow, but calm, humming while she changed him. I cooked in the kitchen, the smell of biscuits filling the room like a hymn. Miss Pearl came over with a basket of baby clothes. Well, look at that, she said, grinning. God sure know how to turn things around. I smiled back. He always does, just in his own time. That night, when the baby finally fell asleep, I found my daughter sitting in the living room with a pen and paper. She was writing something, tears falling now and then. When she finished, she folded the page and handed it to me. It's for you, she whispered. I opened it slow. The letter said, Mama, thank you for never leaving, even when I pushed you away. You were the light I didn't see until everything else went dark. My heart nearly gave out reading that. I reached for her hand and said, That's what mothers do, baby. We love, even in the dark. You still with me? Because that night was the first night I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I sat by the crib watching Isaiah breathe, whispering prayers of gratitude. And just when I thought the storm had passed completely, life gave me one last quiet reminder that when you plant love, even in broken soil, it always finds its way back to bloom. The days turned into weeks, and peace began to settle in like a guest who finally decided to stay. My daughter started smiling again. Not that tight, polite kind of smile she used to wear when she was trying to prove she was fine, but the soft one she had as a child, the one that showed in her eyes before her lips. Each morning she'd bring Isaiah into my room after feeding him. Mama, he likes when you hum, she'd say. And sure enough, every time I started humming, he'd kick his little legs and coo like he understood every word. The house felt alive again, warm, full of laughter and baby cries and the smell of sweet cornbread. The same home that once echoed with silence now carried music made of small ordinary miracles. One afternoon, I sat on the porch while she rocked Isaiah in the chair beside me. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in orange and gold. She looked over and said, "Mama, I used to think I needed a perfect life to be happy, but now I just need peace and family." I smiled. "You had that all along, baby. You just had to come home to it." She nodded, eyes shining. "I see that now." For the first time in a long while, I saw the little girl I'd raised. The one who used to run barefoot through the house, asking me to taste her pretend tea from a plastic cup. It felt like God had handed her back to me, not new, but wiser. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I walked into the baby's room. The moonlight was spilling through the curtains, soft and silver. Isaiah was asleep in his crib, wrapped in that same yellow blanket. I reached down, brushed my hand over his tiny back, and whispered, "You're the blessing we waited for." I sat there for a long time, just watching him breathe. The house creaked, the clock ticked, and everything felt right for once. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message, a number I didn't recognize at first. When I opened it, my heart froze for a second. It was from her husband's lawyer. Just a short text saying he'd been sentenced. 2 years for fraud, community service, restitution. I stared at that message, my emotions tangled somewhere between sadness and relief. I whispered, "God's justice don't always come fast, but it always comes fair." I deleted the text and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked at Isaiah again and said, "Your mama's free now, baby. Free to love right this time." The next morning, I cooked breakfast. Biscuits, gravy, eggs, just the way she liked. When she came into the kitchen, I handed her a plate and said, "Eat up. You've got a new start waiting." She smiled. "So do you, Mama." We sat down together, sunlight spilling across the table, and for the first time in years, it truly felt like family again. And baby, that's when I finally understood. Karma might have done the cleaning, but grace did the healing. A few months later, life had taken on a calm rhythm. I'd wake to Isaiah's soft morning giggles, the sound of my daughter moving around the kitchen, and the smell of coffee drifting down the hall. It was the kind of peace I used to dream about when the house was empty. Some evenings we'd sit on the porch, her feeding the baby while I rocked beside her. The neighborhood kids would ride their bikes up and down the street, and the sunset would melt slow behind the trees. We didn't talk much on those nights. We didn't have to. The quiet between us was finally a good quiet, not the heavy one that used to choke me, but the kind that feels like healing. One afternoon, she came in holding a stack of mail. "Mama, something came for you," she said. It was a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a photo, the one she'd taken at the baby shower, the same day she told me not to come. Only this time, there was something written on the back in her handwriting. "I wish you had been there. I see it all now." I just sat there holding it, tears gathering before I even noticed. I didn't cry because of the pain. I cried because she finally understood it. She reached over, wiped my cheek, and said, "You were right all along, Mama. Love never quits." I smiled through my tears. "It never does, baby. It just waits for you to come back home." A few days later, I was in the kitchen, baking a pie when the phone rang. It was Miss Pearl. "Girl," she said, "you got that baby spoiled yet?" I laughed. "He's working on it." She chuckled. "Good. You deserve some joy. You held your head through every storm." After we hung up, I looked out the window and whispered, maybe this is what all that pain was for. That evening, as I tucked Isaiah into his crib, my daughter leaned in the doorway watching me. "You know, Mama," she said quietly, "I used to think karma was something to fear. But now, I think it's just God's way of fixing what we break." I nodded. "That's right, baby. Karma cleans, but grace rebuilds." We stood there for a moment, just looking at that sleeping child, his tiny chest rising and falling like a promise kept. Later that night, I sat on the couch, the house dark except for the lamp beside me. I picked up that yellow blanket, the same one that had once sat in a brown paper bag at her doorstep, and folded it neatly across my lap. I traced the yarn with my fingers and smiled. I whispered to myself, "You see, baby, love don't end. It just changes shape until we're ready to recognize it again." And that's the truth I carry now, through every breath, every prayer, every sunrise in this old house. Because no matter how far a child drifts, no matter how long the silence lasts, a mother's love will always find its way home. The nights feel softer now. Maybe it's the way Isaiah's tiny breaths fill the house, or maybe it's just the peace I've been praying for, finally settling in my bones. The ache in my heart didn't vanish overnight, baby. It just changed shape, turned into something quieter, something I can live with. Sometimes when the house gets still, I sit in my old rocking chair by the window, the same spot where I once cried alone, whispering prayers that felt like they went unheard. But now, when I pray, I don't ask for anything. I just say thank you. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for the pain that softened me. Thank you for the daughter who found her way back home. You see, forgiveness ain't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about deciding you're tired of carrying it. And Lord knows I carried mine long enough. My daughter still apologizes sometimes. She'll say, "Mama, I don't know how you ever forgave me." I just smile and tell her the truth, because love ain't a favor, it's a promise, and I don't break promises. There are days she still struggles, moments when the memories come back to her like shadows, but I don't bring up the past anymore. The past already did its work. My job now is to make sure our future feels lighter. Last Sunday, we went to church together, me, her, and my friend Emily, and little Isaiah. He wore a white onesie with tiny blue shoes. I held him while the choir sang Amazing Grace, and when they reached the line, I once was lost, but now am found. My daughter slipped her hand into mine. She didn't say a word, but I felt it, that unspoken apology, that thank you, that love rebuilt from ashes. After the service, she leaned on my shoulder and said, "Mama, I finally understand everything you tried to teach me." I smiled. "You had to live your own storms first, baby. Sometimes faith don't grow in sunshine. It grows in the rain." When we got home, I cooked her favorite meal, collard greens, fried chicken, and cornbread. She sat at the table, feeding Isaiah, and said, "I want him to know what real love looks like." I said, "Then just keep showing up, every day, even when it's hard." That night, as I tucked Isaiah into his crib, I hummed that same lullaby I used to sing to her. My daughter stood in the doorway, smiling with tears in her eyes. "He'll always know your voice, Mama," she said. And I told her, "That's good, because one day, when he's older and life starts hurting, I want him to remember that voice, steady, patient, full of love that don't quit." You still with me, baby? Because here's what I've learned after all this. Pain doesn't destroy love. It reveals who's willing to keep loving through it. I used to think karma was about punishment, but now I see it clearer. Karma just clears the path so grace can walk in. My daughter lost everything she thought she wanted, but she found everything she truly needed. And me? I found peace in letting life unfold without trying to control it. These days, when Isaiah laughs, it feels like the sound of healing itself, that bright, bubbling joy filling every crack this house ever had. I look at them and whisper, "Thank you, Lord. You brought my family back." And to anyone listening right now, if your heart's been broken by your own blood, don't close it off. Let it hurt. Let it ache. But don't stop loving. Because one day, maybe when you least expect it, that same love you gave away will find its way back to you, softer, stronger, truer than before. I'm not waiting for another apology. I don't need one. I got something better. A daughter who calls me mama again, and a grandson who smiles like he's carrying our second chance in his tiny hands. So tonight, I'll sit by this window, let the breeze move through the curtains, and whisper one last prayer. Thank you, Lord, for breaking me just enough to make me whole again. Because in the end, baby, that's what this story's really about. Not betrayal, not pain, not karma. It's about love finding its way home, and it always does.